Hello everyone, welcome back to another Dylan Martin fishing video. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you some tips that I've learned for fishing jerkbaits. Jerkbaits can be a wonderful bait, both pre and post spawn, and even during the spawn. They really work sort of year round when it comes to catching large and smallmouth bass. And I've picked up a couple of tips that I'd like to share with you guys on how to catch more fish and how to use jerkbaits more effectively. So to start off our conversation about jerkbaits, there's one thing you need to understand. Jerkbaits have two specific groups within the major umbrella of jerkbaits, and that's shallow diving jerkbaits and deep diving jerkbaits. So in my left hand here, this would be an example of a shallow diving jerkbait. See how it has the small bill? And in my right hand here, this would be an example of a deep diving jerkbait. As you can see, it has that pronounced large bill. So now that you know what the two major groups are, there are two subgroups within that. Now, in both deep diving and shallow diving crankbaits, you have two subgroups. That being flat-faced baits like this one and rounded baits like this one. Rounded baits typically have a shinier finish, while flat-faced baits have that nice flat edge to them. Now, the main difference between flat-faced and round-edged baits is at what time of the day you want to use them. So if it's a cloudy day, not very sunny at all, overcast even, then you want to use a flat-faced jerkbait, because a rounded, shiny finished jerkbait is going to produce more fish and be more effective on a sunny day when there's more light to reflect in the water, especially when you're talking about dirty or murky water. In clean water, you can get away with both at either time, but really a shiny jerkbait is going to be better when it's sunny, and a flat-faced jerkbait is going to be better when it's overcast. With that out of the way, a lot of people don't understand how to fish a jerkbait. And it's kind of all in the name, but a lot of people fish it too slow or too fast, or they just don't fish it right at all. So the major tip I can give you for that is to listen to the fish. If you're fishing a jerkbait and you're kind of cranking it in, you're doing whatever speed of retrieve you're doing, if you get distracted and you stop and they bite that bait, or if you get distracted and you slow down, or if you slow down for whatever reason and then they hit that bait, that's the fish telling you that they're looking for a slower presentation. Whatever you were doing was too fast, you need to tone it down a bit. And conversely, if you cast your bait out there and you're like, oh, I got it in the wrong spot, and you reel it in quickly and a fish hits it then, or for whatever reason you change to a higher retrieve rate or anything like that, you start fishing it faster, that's the fish telling you that they're looking for a faster presentation. So that's the number one tip I can give you. Listen to the fish, see what they're biting. Other than that, a lot of people think when you cast a jerkbait out there, you need to cast it and, do 3 jerks and then let it sit. 3 jerks, let it sit. My advice is to experiment with the amount of time and pause even between jerks. So sometimes I'll cast out there, if it's like a high action day, probably gonna catch fish today, like middle of a beautiful day out. Maybe you can fish it a little fast. You can go out there and you can go 3 jerks, pause for 4 or 5 seconds. 3 jerks, pause for 4 or 5 seconds. But sometimes when it's a little slower, what you're going to want to do is you might even want to put pauses in between your jerks. Jerk, pause for a second. Jerk, pause for a second. Jerk, pause for a second. Stuff like that. And also, another way you can tell is if you have a floating jerkbait. This one specifically is a sinking jerkbait. When you put that bait out there, it's going to sink. If you have a floating jerkbait, when you put that bait out there, it's going to stay in the water except for when you're reeling or jerking it. So if you have a sinking jerkbait, you can allow yourself more time in pauses because the bait's not going to come to the surface where fish might be less likely to hit it, especially if it's not a day where fish would be hitting on top water. Adding to that, sometimes you want to experiment with how many jerks you do. Maybe you want to do 2 jerks. Maybe you want to do 4. Experiment with that. Throw a little variation in your retrieval, and it could produce a bite. And like I said, listen to the fish. Whatever's producing a bite, you should continue to do. So if you cast it out there, and you find that when you jerk it twice and then pause, you get a bite. But if you find when you jerk it 5 times and then pause, you get a bite. Whatever that tells you, go in that direction. Into the next area, we're going to talk about jerkbait color. Now, this one is a clown jerkbait. Generally speaking, In clear water, it really doesn't matter that much, but when you're in murky water and you're fishing a jerkbait, you want to fish colors that are going to be more visible, slightly unnatural looking colors. When you're in clear water, you want to try to stick to a natural looking color. So this clown jerkbait would be an example of an unnatural color. It's very bright. Really, the only fish that looks like that is kind of a yellow perch, but it's really much more pronounced than that. So this would be an excellent bait to throw in slightly dirty water or water with low visibility, stuff like that. But an example of like a more realistic jerkbait would be one like this one right here. This jerkbait looks like a golden shiner. If it's a very clear water area, very high visibility, and the fish are paying attention, you want to throw a more lifelike, more realistic looking jerkbait like this one. Of course, there will be times where no matter what you throw, fish are going to hit it, and the color really doesn't matter. But as a general rule of thumb, those guidelines are really good to stick to. Moving on from that is the size of your jerkbait. If you're fishing and the fishing's kind of slow, it's tough, you're not getting many bites, try downsizing your lure. That's a good rule of thumb when you're talking about any bait, but especially jerkbaits. Like if you're fishing this Yozuri bait all day, you're not getting any bites on it, fishing's really slow, try downsizing to something more of the size of this jerkbait. It's a smaller presentation, less likely to scare fish off, more approachable, and it's just generally going to produce more fish. Now, that might not be bigger fish, but it's going to produce more fish. That's going to do it for today. I hope you enjoyed some jerkbait tips for beginners. Thank you for watching the video. Like and subscribe. Follow my Facebook page, and I'll see you in the next one.